Hello again, I'm back. So last time we talked about townships that were women only, and how I didn't think those were, strictly speaking, matriarchies, although I did think they were set up according to matriarchal principles. And that I thought that a matriarchy should be referred to as an egalitarian matriarchy, because there's far too many people that think that a matriarchy is just putting women in the positions of abusive oppression power, abusive and oppressive power, rather than men, which you would see in a patriarchy. So one of the things that we're going to discuss this time around, and I closed with some discussion about Eve, and how my thought was that the idea of a family led by a man was influenced heavily in the United States, and probably in most of the current industrial world, was heavily influenced by Christianity, because that's what you saw in the Bible. And the example I gave was Eve. Although the really interesting thing about the Bible is that there actually are very, very few, I don't know if there's any nuclear families in it. Most of the families are extended families where you have several generations, the grandfather or patriarch and his wife and his offspring and their wives that they brought in, and the girls are married out to other households and any children they had. And you can get several generations, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 in an extended family. One of the interesting things about the Bible too is that we today think of a man and his wife or wives or whatever, but in the Bible, the man would be getting sons not just from his wife or wives, but apparently it was also considered his right to the handmaids of his wives. And that meant that he could have children, legitimate children from them, that he would count them amongst his sons and daughters. More importantly, just his sons. So, for example, you may have heard of the story of Joseph and his many-colored coat. And I think he had 12 brothers, or were there 12 of them altogether? I don't remember. But the reason that there were so many is because his father had 2 wives, and each of the wives had handmaids. So there were 4 women that were birthing children for this man, and that's why there were 12 brothers and God knows how many sisters. So yeah, nuclear families, or a family that's just, a man, his wife, and their offspring, which is what we call a nuclear family today, did not really seem to exist very much in the Bible. I guess you could call Adam and Eve a nuclear family, but that's the only one that I'm aware of. So if you know of others, let me know. I think it'd be interesting. So the other thing that's really interesting is trying to figure out where the term nuclear family came from. I was talking about this with a friend, and he said to me, I know you don't like nuclear families, but were they really that explosive? And it's like, no, that's not the reason they used the term nuclear. Originally, I did a little bit of reading on this, and let me make sure I get this right. And undoubtedly, I will be pronouncing names wrong. Again, I apologize ahead of time, but the first use of anything like a nuclear family was in the 1880s, and there was a German sociologist, and his name was Tonies, and he used the term Kernfamilie, it means core family, because he was trying to describe a family unit that consisted of a married couple and their dependent children. So that's where they're starting to narrow in on the concept, but they haven't quite gotten to nuclear. Apparently, Émile Durkheim, who is a French sociologist, used it in his book in 1912. The book's title was The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. And he used the term nuclear family to describe a family unit that was seen as the fundamental building block of society. So like you have at the time they considered this healthy. You have a healthy family, which is the father, and he has a wife and he has his children, and many collected together become a community or a town or a city and eventually a country. But you always have that conceptual consistency of the father at the top of the heap, benevolently ruling everybody else under his power. Now, whether he was actually benevolent or not depends on the individual man. But I think that's where Durkheim was coming from for it. And then Bronislaw Malinowski, which, wow, I haven't read about him in years, not since my anthropology degree, which was like years ago. I don't even want to think about how long ago that was. But anyway, in the 1920s, 24, 25, somewhere around there, he apparently used the term nuclear family also. And this is a symbolic term. They're not saying that the family is actually nuclear. They're using it, like I said, symbolically, in that the family unit is the nucleus. The way the nucleus is being used in this particular case is in its meaning of kernel, as in the kernel that is the center of the actual society. That's how you get the building blocks of society. Or since the mid-18th century, nuclear also had the meaning a basic or essential part. And I'm sure we've all learned in science class, although I don't know if they're still teaching it that way today, but I learned it in science, as a nuclear family. It was the little ball, the nucleus was the little ball at the center of the atom that held everything together. So that, if I understand correctly, is where the phrase came from and what it means. But its actual religious or social or political or whatever ramifications varies depending on what era you're talking about. So, like I said, Durkheim in 1912 was using it in the sense of the nuclear family as the building block of society. And in fact, it is also still seen today as the symbolic example of the state. Like I said, the father rules over the family, and the father of the country, whether it's a king or a president or a dictator, rules over the family of the country. The country as symbolized. That's not quite right. The family that is the symbol used for the country. There we go. That's better. So, talking about cultural reflections of the leadership of families, which led to the nuclear family. The idea that the male must always lead the family is a really old idea. The earliest that I know of that it was written about was late 6th century BCE, when Confucius was writing. Now, to be fair, Confucius was dealing with a very troubled time in his country. Apparently, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while since I read this, but apparently there was a particular family, not his, a particular lineage, which had absorbed most of the power to it and was abusing this power in a political sense. Well, actually, more than that. Basically, it was a time of great difficulty for anyone who wasn't part of that family. And what Confucius was trying to do, if I understand correctly, is he was writing about what harmonious government and a harmonious society would be like, in the hopes that this would inspire the powerful members of this family to emulate that more closely, and this would be better for everybody else and the country as well. As it turns out, history tells us that the family was unimpressed and did not actually change what it was doing. And if I remember correctly, it did actually take a revolution some years later to cycle that family down so that somebody else could come into power. And Confucius is a very good example of how we have to pick and choose between things that people have written, because there's many things that he's written that many people believe very strongly, that is inspiring to them even. Excuse me. But there's also the fact that he was an unrepentant misogynist as well. He really did not seem to think that women were intellectually on a par with men in any way, shape, or form. But what he basically wrote repeatedly is the most natural, harmonious, and orderly form of government was the ruler effectively functioning like a family patriarch and ruling everything around him like it was a family. And you want your family to thrive. You don't want to just abuse and steal money from it so that you're the only one that has money. He was basically trying to get the most powerful family to think of all of China as its community and family rather than just itself. Which, a laudable goal. It's a shame it didn't work, but thus is patriarchy, I guess. What's the next one that I can think of? Oh, Aristotle. This is a couple of centuries later, of course. And Aristotle he was another misogynist, but he came from a very misogynist society. For example, one of the things that was routinely done at that time is that if you had a daughter, you would find a man twice her age to marry her to. And she would be anywhere from 12 to 16. So, of course, the guy would be somewhere in his late 20s, mid-30s. And I'm sure you can see how that would ground power in the man. Not only is he completely full grown, where she is not, he's had time to experience life. He's probably been trained in how to experience life. She doesn't even know who she is completely yet. She's grown up completely under the thumb of her father. So yeah, that sort of thing is why frequently age gap relationships are viewed with a very jaundiced eye. Like, what are you doing? Today, still, is that kind of capacity for emotional and physical abuse. But back to Aristotle. He uses both religious authority and his reasoning to underwrite his beliefs, which were written down as, let's see, where's the quote? Oh, yes. The male parent is the ruler of his family in virtue both of affection and of seniority, which is characteristic of royal government, and therefore Homer finely designated Zeus by the words, father of men and gods, as the king of them all. I admit I take some issue with his statement that the ruler, both by affection and of seniority, because, quite frankly, if you set things up so women cannot be senior to their husbands, and that's all they've ever known, I can see how the effectively Stockholm syndrome would cause these women to say, oh yes, I love my husband. So, I don't know. I don't know if they're taking their example from Zeus, who also was somebody who could not keep it in his pants. But anyway, Aristotle goes on to state his belief that correct human relationships, so he's painting with a very, very broad brush here. Correct human relationships start with male-led families, progress to male-organized villages, and culminate in the male-ruled city-state or polis, P-O-L-I-S. So, yeah, as far as Aristotle is concerned, power is completely embodied in men, and there is none in women. And again, this isn't really surprising. One of the definitions of shame for Greek men, from what I've read, is to be penetrated. This is a double-edged sword in that if that is a source of shame, then a woman, by definition, can never be anything but ashamed. She cannot be a person of honor, which is that kind of double standard. You can see it echoed later on in Christianity, where the good woman is the Virgin Mary, the mother of Christ. And she's held up as the ideal that women are supposed to aspire to, which is absolutely impossible. You can be as meek and mild and submissive as you can possibly be, but once you're married, if the marriage is consummated, there is no way that you will not lose a virginity. So by holding up a virgin as the culmination of perfect womanhood, Christianity has made sure that women can never succeed. We'll go more into this later. Right now I'm going to stop here because this is kind of a downer subject. And I'd rather talk about more upbeat things, I guess. So thank you very much for sticking with me all this time. If you've got a moment, feel free to push the like button if you enjoyed it. I'd love it if you'd subscribe. And if you want to share it with your friends, that's awesome too. And I'll see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.